HOA thought I was just another recluse in flannel, until her bulldozer hit the wrong property line, and I walked into her HOA meeting in a senator's suit. They flew drones, filed fake maps, tried to erase me with paperwork and concrete. But I had the title, the footage, and a law degree signed by the Capitol. She bulldozed my cabin, so I bulldozed her entire kingdom. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. There's a kind of silence out here you can't buy in the city. Not the kind that's hollow or eerie, but the kind that settles in your bones. You can hear the wind move through the trees like it's brushing secrets off their branches. That's what I came for. After 15 years in state politics, 10 of them in the Capitol, I didn't need applause and I sure as hell didn't need attention. What I needed was stillness, and I found it on the land my father left me. A 2-bedroom cedar cabin, weather-worn and stubborn, perched just shy of the forest ridge. 10 acres, 1 creek, and no neighbors within shouting distance, except for the fringe of a newly minted HOA community that was slowly infecting the countryside like ivy on brick. Technically, I was just outside their boundary lines. Legally, completely out of their jurisdiction. But that never stopped tyrants before. I didn't broadcast who I was. No signs, no vanity plates, no campaign photos. I hadn't even told the local post office to forward my mail. I wore flannel instead of suits, grew a beard, spent my mornings chopping wood and my evenings on the porch, watching my dog, Boone, chase shadows across the yard. For the first time in a long while, I was just a man. Not a vote, not a headline, just a man. And then she arrived. I first saw her in early spring, driving a souped-up HOA golf cart with President bedazzled in rhinestones on the back, and a clipboard held like a holy relic. Mid-40s maybe, blonde bob, mirrored sunglasses, and a presence that made the air go cold even in the sun. Her name was Karen. No, really, Karen Whitlock. She waved without smiling, drove right past the community line and up my gravel path like she owned it. I stood by the shed, leaning on my shovel, wondering if I should play dumb or dangerous. "Sir," she called, stepping out, eyes scanning my porch like it was an unlicensed brothel. "You're not in compliance." I blinked. "Excuse me." "This structure," she pointed to my shed, "doesn't match the approved architectural aesthetic." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not mockingly, just genuinely confused. "This land isn't under your HOA." She didn't flinch. "We recently updated our community expansion plan. This parcel is within future development zones. You'll need to submit for review or risk penalties." I didn't argue, I didn't explain. I just said, "Noted," and went back to work. She stood there for a second longer, like she was trying to place me. I watched her eyes flick up and down my frame, searching for something. Authority maybe. Recognition. She didn't find it. Karen left in a puff of gravel dust, and I thought that'd be the end of it. But it wasn't. The next day, there was a bright yellow envelope taped to my gate. Violation notice. Unregistered outbuilding. 2 days later, unauthorized fence style. Then, non-harmonious exterior color. My cabin was stained forest green. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Legally, her reach ended where the forest began. But each visit felt more brazen than the last. One morning, Boone barked at a drone hovering above my garden. I looked up and saw it buzz away back toward the HOA community. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. Karen wasn't just playing HOA president, she was building an empire, and anyone outside it was a threat. Even someone she didn't recognize. Especially someone she didn't recognize. You'd think someone who runs a neighborhood would do their homework. Maybe search a name, look up the deed, pull the parcel maps. But I guess it never occurred to her that a man in work boots and a flannel shirt could be the same person who signed the bill that nearly dissolved half the HOAs in this state. No, to Karen, I was just an outsider, a stain on her manicured kingdom. And she was about to learn the cost of underestimating the quiet ones. I figured the first few notices were bluffs, bureaucratic bluster. The kind of petty paperwork I'd seen plenty of times in committee hearings, sound and fury signifying nothing. The first was about non-compliant foliage. The second, unauthorized fencing style. Both were printed in Comic Sans on HOA letterhead, taped to my mailbox like ransom notes. I didn't respond, didn't even remove them, just let the rain do its work. After all, my land wasn't part of their jurisdiction. Not officially, not legally. But Karen didn't care about legal. She cared about obedience. 2 days later, I got hit with a fine $75 for unregistered trash receptacles that didn't meet aesthetic standards. Boone's food bowl was cited as visible debris. That one made me laugh, until I realized someone had been close enough to the house to photograph it. That's when the mood started to shift. I began noticing her board members driving by more often, always slow, always staring. One of them, Rodney, I think his name was, had the kind of face that looked like it had never finished forming. He parked outside my gate one evening and just sat there, engine running like he was waiting for me to approach. I didn't. Then came the drone. I heard it before I saw it, whining just above the tray line like a mosquito with a camera. Boone lost it, barking at the sky, until it hovered back toward the HOA development. It wasn't a toy either. This thing had a gimbal, high-res lens, the works. A few days later, I received another violation. This time for an unauthorized garden path. The letter included an aerial photo of my stone walkway, shot from the exact angle I'd seen the drone hovering. Now it was personal. I installed hidden cameras around the property, motion-activated, high-resolution, night vision. Politicians learn early that paranoia isn't a weakness, it's insurance. And I was done giving Karen the benefit of the doubt. A week after the cameras went up, I got my first real break. It was just after 6 a.m. Boone started barking, low and guttural. I stepped out onto the porch in my robe and boots, coffee in hand, and saw a man crouched near the edge of my shed, pretending to inspect the grass. I recognized him immediately. Gary, HOA board member, part-time insurance agent, full-time lackey. "Morning," I called, voice flat. He jerked up like a kid caught cheating on a test. "Just checking easement lines," he stammered, holding up a clipboard like a shield. "Easements you don't have," I said. He muttered something and backed away, pretending to take notes as he returned to the cart, parked across the boundary line. Later that night, I reviewed the footage. Gary had spent 9 minutes prowling near my tool shed. Long enough to look. Long enough to plan. That's when I started keeping a logbook date, time, license plates, exact wording of every in-town. I began cross-referencing HOA communications with their visits. The patterns were precise. Too precise. It wasn't random harassment. It was escalation. Karen wasn't just trying to intimidate me, she was trying to provoke me, to catch me losing my temper, reacting on camera. Give her just one incident she could twist into aggression, and she'd have all the justification she needed to push harder. But I didn't give her that. Instead, I smiled when she passed by. I waved. I even trimmed the hedges she complained about, then planted sunflowers in their place just to irritate her sense of uniformity. Her lips tightened every time. The more I complied with meaningless requests, the more absurd her violations became. Wind chimes exceed decibel threshold. Unauthorized bird feeders attract invasive species. Firewood stacked without HOA alignment protocols. Boone's chew toy even made the list. Still, I said nothing. I documented everything. And the more I smiled, the more unhinged Karen came. By late spring, the HOA newsletter had started publishing thinly veiled digs about non-conforming residents and community threats. One article, clearly written by Karen, referred to an off-grid anarchist living on questionable land and openly defying board guidance. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about aesthetics, or rules, or even the land. It was about me. She didn't know my name, but she hated that she couldn't control me. Symbolism. A man who once wielded power with a pen now fends off a tyrant with a bird feeder. What Karen didn't know was that every letter, every fine, every drone flight was being archived, time-stamped, geotagged, legally admissible. I wasn't reacting. I was building a case. And soon, the next move would be hers. It was just after 10 p.m. when I got the message. An email, no subject line, no name, just a burner address and a link to an audio file. I almost deleted it, thought it was spam, but something made me click. Static. Then voices. Familiar ones. He's ignoring everything. We've given him enough notices. Karen's voice, sharp, impatient. So what's next? Another man asked. We escalate. If he won't comply, we classify the shed as an unauthorized structure. Maybe push for eminent domain, claim the land's improperly zoned. Worst case, we demo the place and call it a cleanup. A laugh. Then Karen again. Let's flatten that shack. I sat there for a while after it ended, hand frozen on the mouse, the sound of my heartbeat louder than the silence in the room. She wasn't posturing. She was planning. This wasn't about violations anymore. This was about removal. I didn't know who sent the audio until the next morning. A knock on the gate. Boone growled low. I opened the latch and found Devin, a nervous board member who always stood 2 steps behind Karen like he was afraid of her shadow. I didn't send it, he said quickly, but I know who did, and I know what they're doing is wrong. He wouldn't come past the property line. Said he had family. A mortgage, but he handed me a flash drive and whispered, check the metadata. They altered the HOA's digital maps. Your parcel is now listed under probationary common ground. They changed it last month. Then he left. That night, I dug in. I pulled up the original county GIS records and compared them to the HOA's interactive map. Sure enough, the lines had moved. A few pixels, subtle enough to miss, just enough to include my cabin, my shed, and a corner of the south ridge where I'd installed solar panels. To anyone checking the HOA system, my property looked like it was under their control. And if that was true digitally, they could use it to justify fines, or worse. But they'd overplayed their hand, because I recognized the watermark on the remapped PDF files. Whitlock Surveying and Zoning Inc. Whitlock. Karen's maiden name. I searched the state contractor registry. The firm's primary license holder, Daniel Whitlock, registered land surveyor, licensed only 2 years ago. And every document tied to my boundary violation had his electronic stamp. It was a house of cards. A conflict of interest wrapped in digital forgery. But that didn't mean they wouldn't act on it. I filed for an emergency injunction with the county court first thing the next morning. I attached everything: audio file, metadata logs, surveyor conflict, and the remapping discrepancies. The clerk promised a hearing date, but the earliest slot they had was 3 weeks out. 3 weeks. That's all the time Karen would need to bulldoze me off the face of the mountain. I considered going public, calling a press contact, even leaking it to a political blog. But that wasn't my play. Not yet. First, I needed to know why. Why go through all this trouble for a 10-acre plot? It wasn't prime real estate. Not unless you knew what was under it. So I went back to my dad's old files, paper maps, geological surveys, water rights from the 80s. That's when I saw it. A faded notation scribbled across the southern ridge. Lithium samples, 1989. Not commercially viable yet. I did some digging. The past 5 years had seen a surge in local lithium extraction interests. Battery-grade material. Worth millions. And my land sat right on a known deposit, quiet, untouched, and suddenly very valuable. Karen knew. Or at least, she suspected. She wasn't just flexing her HOA title. She was trying to seize the land before I knew what it was worth. Get me out, file a lien, repurpose it under community ownership, and sell the rights to a third party before anyone noticed. But she made one mistake. She underestimated how quiet people fight back. It was 6:07 a.m. when the engines started. Not cars. Heavy machinery. The kind of growl you feel before you hear it. Low, vibrating through the earth like a storm marching in. Boone was already at the door, snarling. I stepped onto the porch barefoot, coffee half full in one hand, phone in the other. And there she was, Karen, standing at the edge of my gravel drive like it was a red carpet. Coffee in one hand, clipboard in the other. Heels planted firm in the dirt like this was her coronation. Behind her, 2 men in reflective vests, a white pickup, and a bulldozer idling like a loaded gun. I looked at her. She smiled like this was a neighborhood bake sale. We've given you enough notices, she said, motioning to her clipboard like it was the Constitution. You're trespassing on HOA-controlled land. We're reclaiming it per Community Code 1. I didn't move, didn't raise my voice. Just raised my phone. This is private property, I said, loud and clear for the camera. I have the deed. The title. The original zoning. You're trespassing, and you're committing felony property destruction. Karen's expression didn't change. She gave a flick of her wrist like a royal wave. Proceed. The bulldozer lunged forward. The crash of metal tearing through my front fence echoed like a rifle shot. Splinters flew. Boone barked, pulling at his leash from the porch, furious and confused. I stepped down the stairs slowly, filming every inch. The machine's claw scraped along the side of my irrigation trench, pulling up fresh pipe, ripping through sod skimming within feet of Boone's shelter. "Back off!" I shouted to the driver. "There's a dog there." The man paused, looked at Karen. She gave a shrug. "He can move the dog." The driver reversed a little, but the damage was done. Half my garden was gone. A storage bench had been crushed. The fence lay in pieces. Still, I didn't stop filming. I filmed the bulldozer. I filmed her face. I filmed every clipboard she waved, every smug sip of coffee she took, every gleam of morning sun off her ridiculous rhinestone badge. She wanted a reaction. I gave her a record. When they were done, she strutted back to her cart like a queen returning from conquest. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't need to. She thought she'd won. But what she didn't see, what she couldn't see, was the second camera I had mounted in the shed window, capturing a wide shot from above. Multiple angles. Date stamped. GPS tagged. I waited until they were gone. Then I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper and wrote down everything. Time of entry, number of people, equipment used, license plate on the contractor's truck. Then I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in months. Inside, under some folded flannel and my father's old buck knife, sat my backup satellite phone. I took a breath, turned it on, and made a single call. Not to the police. Not to my lawyer. Not even to the county judge. I called Emily, my chief of staff. She picked up on the second ring. "Matt? I need 3 things," I said. "I need the state zoning archive access. I need an emergency briefing with the AG's office, and I need the press log for next week." There was silence. Then, "They did something, didn't they?" "They bulldozed part of my property," I said flatly. "They think they can get away with it. And they don't know who you are." "No," I said. "They don't." I hung up. The next few hours moved like a war plan. I uploaded the video to a private drive, made a copy on a flash drive, and stored it in a lockbox under the porch. I called Devin, the HOA whistleblower, and let him know the time had come. He agreed to testify if needed, said he'd seen too much already. Then I changed clothes. No flannel, no work boots, a charcoal gray suit, clean shave, silk tie. The one I wore the night I passed the Clean Water Reform Bill. I hadn't worn it since the governor's gala. By the time sunset hit, I was ready. Let them have their moment. Let Karen believe she'd steamrolled the threat. Let her laugh at her clipboard and sip her overpriced coffee. Because tomorrow, I'd be walking into their town hall, not as a recluse, not as a faceless nuisance, but as State Senator Matthew R. Blake. And they were about to find out who they'd just bulldozed. 3 days later, I walked into the Lion's Den. The HOA's monthly town hall was being held at the community center, a gaudy faux Tuscan building with a stone facade, crown molding, and just enough marble to make residents feel like peasants being granted audience. The chairs were lined in rigid rows. The snack table offered dry cookies and watery lemonade. The air was thick with tension and discontent. I arrived 10 minutes after the meeting began, just late enough to make an entrance. Karen stood at the front, mid-lecture. One heel pivoted like a metronome, eyes darting between her notes and the restless crowd. Behind her, a projected slide read, Q2 HOA Development Plan, Budget Adjustments and Easement Integration. Translation: more fees, more rules, more land grabs. "We've had to increase enforcement due to non-compliance," she said, "particularly in areas where certain residents believe they're above community standards." I stepped into the aisle. Not in flannel, not in work boots, but in the same charcoal suit I wore the night I debated the Energy Sovereignty Act on the Senate floor. Karen saw me, her words faltered. Her hand froze mid-gesture. The room turned. I didn't speak until I reached the front row. Then I straightened my jacket, turned to face the board, and said, clearly, calmly, "My name is State Senator Matthew R. Blake, and I'm here to discuss the criminal destruction of private property committed by this board. Gasps. Audible ones. Someone dropped a pen. A woman in the third row whispered, "He's a senator," like I'd materialized out of thin air. Karen's face turned to porcelain. "What?" she stammered. "Senator? You never—" "No," I said. "I didn't tell you, because I was living on my private land, lawfully, quietly, and entirely outside your jurisdiction. Until your bulldozer crossed the line. Literally." I reached into my briefcase and produced a manila folder, thick, tabbed, court-stamped. "This is a cease and desist order from the Office of the Attorney General, citing your actions as violations of state property laws, fraudulent boundary reclassification, and criminal trespass." Karen tried to interject, but I continued. Voice steady, room silent. "Your surveillance, illegal under state privacy codes. Your remapping, filed through a firm owned by your brother, with no oversight and no legal basis. And your demolition order, unsupported by any court, permit, or emergency declaration. You ordered a private contractor to destroy part of my property under false authority." I handed the folder to the board's treasurer. The man flinched, like it might burn him. "Every one of these violations is felony grade, and each one carries a maximum sentence. But let's be generous, Karen. Let's just talk restitution." Karen reached for her coffee. Her hand shook. The cup tipped, slipped from her fingers, and landed with a hollow clatter on the podium. "You think this is going to scare me?" she hissed, her voice just loud enough to carry. "No," I said, turning toward the audience. "But I think it's going to wake them up." The residents leaned forward, eyes wide. Some had their phones out, recording, live streaming. A few looked relieved. "How many of you have received unexplained fines in the past 6 months?" I asked. Hands rose. "How many of you have had property disputes? Denied permits? Sudden changes in fees?" More hands. A murmur swept the room. The HOA exists to protect the community, not to enrich a tyrant. What happened to me was outrageous, but what's happened to you is systematic. Karen was no longer speaking. Her face had hardened into something between rage and fear, but the silence was louder than any denial. I stepped back. "A full investigation is already underway," I added, "and I'll be meeting with residents over the coming weeks. Privately, no more intimidation, no more secrecy." Then I turned, adjusted my cuffs, and walked out. Behind me, I heard the questions begin. Not from me, from them. "Did you know she did this? What else have they covered up? He's a senator. What else does he know?" Karen had built her kingdom on fear, on silence, on control. But today, I took her silence and turned it into a megaphone. Then came the audit. What started as a routine forensic review turned into a financial autopsy. The HOA's books were a mess on purpose. Hidden maintenance funds, inflated landscaping costs, and large payouts to a shell company listed as Ridge Tech Development, which, surprise, was tied to Karen's personal LLC. By the time the auditors were done, they'd uncovered $1.2 million in misappropriated HOA funds, spread across 5 years. Enough for a small development, or, say, hush money, and land acquisition. Karen's defense? Clerical error, again. The auditors weren't laughing. But the final card, the ace, was the lithium. I'd gone back through my father's old geological notes, handed down from a time when the land was just land. Back then, lithium wasn't worth a second glance. But in today's world of EVs and battery storage, a lithium vein was liquid gold buried in stone. I confirmed the deposit through an independent environmental survey, one with no ties to the HOA. He returned a 3-page report, which I now kept in my briefcase like a loaded pistol. Mid-grade lithium content, concentrated ridge spine, with preliminary projections of commercial viability, it read. Private ownership, deeded and filed under Blake Mr. That alone would have secured me the legal upper hand. But then I got a call from an energy journalist I'd worked with during a Senate Clean Energy Summit. "There's been whisperings," she said, "that a developer in your county's been quietly buying up parcels for mineral rights, shell names, dummy buyers. It all tracks back to Ridge Tech."
And Ridge Tech?
Karen again. Turns out, she knew, probably months before I did. She'd gotten wind of the ridge's potential value, and the plan was simple: remap the parcel, falsify jurisdiction, demolish the structure, declare it vacant HOA land, then sell the mineral rights before the real news broke. But she made a critical mistake. She filed the Ridgetech mineral exploration contract 2 weeks after my name had been logged as the private rights holder, under a 1992 grandfather clause. It was checkmate. She bulldozed the wrong man's land. And in doing so, she exposed a chain of corruption that went all the way through her board, her family, and the fake firms she propped up to drain the community dry. I didn't even need to press criminal charges myself. The state attorney general picked up the case. Karen was arrested in front of her house. It didn't make the national news, but it made the county front page. HOA president arrested in land fraud scandal. Wetlock surveying shuttered in mapping scheme. Senator's property targeted for lithium grab. The irony was almost poetic. She came for my garden shed. She walked away in handcuffs, surrounded by state marshals. As for the HOA, a full vote was held. The board was disbanded. Control was handed over to a third-party management firm, pending a permanent restructure. Residents celebrated like a town had just overthrown a dictator. One woman left me a pie on my porch. Said it was for surviving Karen. I didn't have the heart to tell her I'd faced lobbyists scarier than that woman in heels. The best part? Karen's brother tried to sue me for defamation. I countersued for malicious property fraud and won. The settlement paid for the full restoration of my land and then some. I took that money and funded a community legal aid program focused on HOA abuse and property rights. They named it the Blake Initiative. Let's just say the next Karen who tries something similar won't get past the mailbox. You can try to bury the truth, but once it starts breathing, it runs faster than wildfire. By the end of the week, the story wasn't just local. It was everywhere. Small-town justice served with a side of poetic irony. The headlines practically wrote themselves. HOA president bulldozes state senator's land in lithium heist. Karen's kingdom crumbles under fraud charges. From wind chimes to wire fraud. The rise and fall of an HOA queen. The press had a field day. News vans lined the edge of the property like buzzards in lawn chairs. Helicopters hovered over the ridge for aerial shots of the now infamous bulldozed trench. Someone even flew a drone over just to recreate Karen's surveillance tactics. With the caption, "Now we're watching you, Karen." And me. I gave one press conference. I didn't schedule it, didn't advertise it, just stepped outside one morning, walked to the edge of the destruction, and stood in front of the cameras already camped there. I wore the same flannel shirt she once said violated HOA aesthetic values. Behind me, where the fence used to stand, I'd planted a handmade wooden sign. This land is protected by state law. Trespassers will be prosecuted or publicly humiliated. Reporters chuckled. Some even clapped. I kept my statement short. This incident isn't just about me. It's about every homeowner who's been intimidated, overcharged, or silenced by unchecked HOA power. My land was targeted, but what they really tried to bulldoze was accountability. We fought back, legally, strategically, and with receipts. And now, thanks to the investigation, reforms are coming that will protect communities like this from ever being turned into personal kingdoms again. I ended by thanking the whistleblower who came forward and the residents who demanded transparency once they knew the truth. The mic drop was unspoken, but the message was clear. Karen underestimated the wrong man, and the public was watching. Later that night, I sat on my rebuilt porch, watching the news replay my speech. The reporter called it the most entertaining civic reckoning in county history. Social media was less formal. Karen vs. State trended for 2 days. A meme went viral showing Karen in a toy bulldozer facing off with a mountain labeled "Due Process." And in a rare moment of bipartisan agreement, commenters from all walks of life chimed in. Finally, a senator doing something useful. I'd vote for this guy twice. This is why you don't mess with quiet neighbors. They say revenge is best served cold. I say it's best served on camera, flanked by news vans and a state seal. Karen didn't go quietly. Of course she didn't. She showed up to court in pearls and a pantsuit, flanked by 2 attorneys, and not a trace of guilt. Her posture was perfect. Her smirk was measured. She looked like a woman preparing to spin the narrative one last time. I was misled, she said. voice dripping with manufactured sincerity. The board acted without my full knowledge. My brother assured me the maps were verified. I was just following protocol. The courtroom murmured. A few residents in the gallery rolled their eyes. I said nothing. I let her talk. Let her bury herself with each carefully rehearsed line. Then my attorney stood. Your Honor, before we close, we have one final piece of evidence. We handed over a flash drive. The courtroom tech connected it to the overhead screen. The judge nodded. What followed wasn't a legal document or a spreadsheet. It was audio. Raw. Unedited. Karen's voice crackled through the speakers. Honestly, I can't wait to see his little cabin flatten. Bulldoze that shack and let him cry to his trees. He should have followed the rules like everyone else. There was laughter. Hers full-throated, triumphant, and unmistakably damning. Silence fell. Then, slowly, her smile cracked. Her face went pale. That voicemail had been left by accident. Her phone still connected to mine after a dropped call during one of her HOA robo-notices. She never knew it recorded. And now everyone did. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled. Mrs. Whitlock, this recording directly contradicts your sworn statement about intent. It demonstrates clear motive, malice, and foreknowledge of the destruction. Karen's lawyer looked like he wanted to melt through the floor. The ruling came swift and hard. Restitution for all damages. Full reimbursement of legal fees. A formal, public apology to be delivered at the next HOA meeting. And most notably, a referral to the State Bureau of Investigation for further review. Because hidden within the audit trail was something more insidious. False zoning data had been uploaded not just for my land, but for 3 other parcels across the state. All near rare earth mineral zones. What started as a petty abuse of power had turned into a statewide fraud investigation. The judge banged the gavel. Karen didn't look at me. Couldn't. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just stood, shook the judge's hand, and walked out with my dignity and my land intact. Outside, a reporter asked what I thought of the verdict. This was never about revenge, I said. It was about accountability. But between you and me, the look on Karen's face when she realized she'd recorded her own downfall. That was justice. I rebuilt the cabin. Same footprint, same view. But this time, I didn't just restore what was lost. I elevated it. Reinforced beams, reclaimed wood, a solar roof with enough battery storage to run off-grid indefinitely. Boone has a heated shelter now, custom-built from the old porch planks. Karen's bulldozer shattered. Seemed only fitting. Peace returned, but not the same kind I had before. This peace had teeth. Karen, banned for life from holding any HOA position in the state. Her name now sits on a watch list of disqualified community board candidates. Her brother, license revoked, civil penalties pending. His firm closed its doors under a mountain of regulatory violation. The HOA itself was dissolved and placed under state receivership. A neutral firm now manages basic services with transparency and public oversight. Residents voted overwhelmingly to never again allow a single individual unchecked authority. And me? I got back to work. With bipartisan support. Yes, even from some who used to think I was too soft on land use. I passed the Property Protection Act. The law created digital safeguards against unauthorized boundary alterations, required public notice of zoning updates, and established legal aid funding for homeowners under HOA threat. The bill passed 39-1. Karen's old district rep abstained. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about drawing a line, literally and figuratively, making sure no one else ever had to wake up to find their life being torn down by someone with a clipboard and a god complex. I still live here. I still wake up to Boone at the door, tail thumping against the wood. I still drink my coffee on the porch. And every now and then, when the sky hums with the buzz of a drone overhead, I just smile and raise my mug. They came to erase me, to flatten my world for profit, for power, for pride. But I didn't break. I documented, I waited. I exposed. They tried to bulldoze my peace. Instead, I bulldozed their empire. And now? I own every sunrise over this ridge. Ever been pushed by a clipboard tyrant. What they did to me, they've done to thousands. This wasn't just one battle, it was the blueprint. Stick around. The next HOA thinks they run the town. Let's see what happens when they meet someone with a deed and a backbone.